50 feet below the Reich Chancellery Garden in the center of Berlin, in a bunker of poured concrete and steel, the man who had plunged the world into the most destructive war in history was spending his last hours alive. Above him, Berlin was being destroyed. Soviet forces were fighting block by block, building by building, room by room through what had been one of Europe's great capitals. Inside the bunker, the world had shrunk to a series of small rooms, a few dozen people, and the disintegrating remnants of a regime that had once controlled most of Europe. What happened in those final 24 hours has been reconstructed from the accounts of survivors, from Soviet forensic investigations, and from documents captured in the aftermath. The bunker and its inhabitants, the Führerbunker, Hitler's final headquarters, was not the comfortable command center of wartime mythology. It was a functional but Spartan underground facility 50 feet below the garden of the Reich Chancellery, with walls 4 meters thick. The constant sound of artillery. By April 1945, Soviet guns were close enough that the bunker trembled with near-constant impacts, created an atmosphere that survivors consistently describe as surreal. The cast of characters in those final days was a strange compression of the Nazi hierarchy. Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, had moved his wife and 6 children into the bunker, a decision whose implications for the children were not yet apparent but would soon become devastating. Martin Bormann, Hitler's personal secretary and gatekeeper, controlled access and communications with obsessive precision. General Wilhelm Burgdorf and General Hans Krebs represented the increasingly fictional German military command. Eva Braun, Hitler's longtime companion, had arrived voluntarily from Bavaria despite being urged to leave Germany. Her presence in the final days is one of the more poignant details of an event largely defined by horror. By April 29th, the Soviet army was fighting within a kilometer of the bunker entrance. The sounds of combat were no longer distant. They were close enough to be identified by type. April 28th to 29th, 1945. The news that broke Hitler's last remaining composure arrived in the early hours of April 28th. Reports reached the bunker that Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, one of Hitler's most trusted lieutenants, had been conducting secret negotiations with the Western Allies through a Swedish intermediary. Himmler had told Count Bernadotte that he had the authority to surrender German forces in the West. Hitler's reaction to this betrayal, and he experienced it as betrayal, from the man he had called Der Treue Heinrich, the faithful Heinrich, was explosive. In a bunker full of people who had learned not to contradict him, this information stripped away whatever equanimity he had maintained. Himmler was immediately declared a traitor and stripped of all offices. Orders went out for his arrest, orders that could not be executed because the regime no longer had the capacity to execute them. The same night, confirmation arrived that Hermann Göring, who had sent a telegram from Bavaria suggesting he take over as Germany's leader given Hitler's situation, had also been dismissed and was under arrest. 2 of the most senior figures of the Nazi regime gone in one night. Through the night of April 28th into the early morning of April 29th, Hitler dictated his personal will and his political testament. The political testament was remarkable in its consistency. It blamed the Jews for the war, for Germany's defeat, for everything. Right to the end, the ideology that had driven the catastrophe remained unchanged and unexamined. At approximately midnight on April 28th to 29th, Hitler married Eva Braun in a brief civil ceremony in the conference room of the bunker. 2 municipal officials were found, the required paperwork was signed, and the marriage that Hitler had refused throughout his political career, fearing it would diminish his image, was completed in a concrete room 50 feet underground while Soviet shells landed above. After the ceremony, there was a small gathering. People came in to offer congratulations, former associates, staff members. It had the quality, multiple survivors recalled, of a gathering that people didn't know how to leave, at which no one knew what to say. The morning, April 30th, 1945. On the morning of April 30th, the military conference was brief. General Krebs reported what everyone already knew. Soviet forces were now fighting in the Tiergarten, Berlin's Central Park, and in the Potsdamer Platz, within half a kilometer of the Chancellery. There were no German reserves, no relief forces, no plan that hadn't already failed. Hitler ate lunch with his two secretaries, Traudl Junge and Gerda Christian, and his vegetarian cook, Constanze Manciali. He appeared to his staff, by their accounts, as strangely calm. The decision had been made. There was nothing left to manage. After lunch, Hitler and Eva Braun said their farewells to the bunker's inhabitants. The scene that survivors describe is one of the stranger images of the final days. Men and women who had served the regime through its years of power, now receiving a farewell handshake in a concrete corridor 50 feet underground, the walls trembling, the Soviet army within earshot. Hitler and Eva Braun withdrew to Hitler's private study. The door was closed. What followed was reconstructed from forensic evidence and from the accounts of those waiting outside. A single gunshot was heard, though some accounts say two. After waiting a few minutes, aides entered the study. Eva Braun had died from cyanide poisoning. Hitler had shot himself. He was 56 years old. The bodies were carried up to the Chancellery garden, through the bunker stairwell into daylight, into an atmosphere of smoke and the sound of artillery, and placed in a shell crater. Petrol was poured over them. They were set alight, in accordance with Hitler's explicit instructions. The burning of the bodies was not entirely successful. Soviet troops, when they entered the Chancellery grounds shortly after, found partially burned remains. Soviet forensic investigation eventually identified the bodies through dental records. Hitler's dentist assistant Käthe Häusermann was able to confirm the dental bridge work matched the records. The Soviet government, for reasons of their own, partly to avoid creating a martyrdom site, partly out of ongoing uncertainty about whether Hitler was genuinely dead or had escaped, kept the forensic conclusions partly secret for decades. Rumors of Hitler's escape persisted. They were baseless, but the secrecy that might have definitively ended them was maintained. In the days after Hitler's death, the bunker's remaining inhabitants made various decisions. Goebbels and his wife had their 6 children killed with morphine overdose and cyanide, a decision that has remained one of the most discussed and condemned acts of the entire bunker period. Goebbels and his wife then died by their own hands. Bormann attempted to escape and died. The exact circumstances have been debated, but his skeletal remains were identified in 1998. Germany's formal surrender followed on May 8, 1945. The war in Europe was over. The scale of what ended with Hitler's death is almost incomprehensible from an individual human scale. World War II killed an estimated 70 to 85 million people, approximately 3% of the 1940 world population. The Holocaust had murdered 6 million Jews and millions of others. Cities across Europe and Asia lay in ruins. The political map of the world had been permanently redrawn, all of it traceable through the decisions and ideology and leadership of the regime, to a man who spent his last hours in a concrete room underground dictating a testament that blamed his victims for what he had done. The Führerbunker was demolished by Soviet and later East German authorities over the following decades. Today, a small informational sign marks the parking lot that covers the site in central Berlin. The city above it has been rebuilt. The country it once lay beneath has become something entirely different. The final 24 hours are documented because the survivors documented them. Secretaries who wrote memoirs, aides who gave testimony, forensic investigators who did their work carefully. The record exists because people insisted on making it exist. That matters. Subscribe to Warfront Stories. History like this doesn't get easier to look at, but it's essential to look.